Have you ever been asked to find the derivative of a function that has a product and a quotient in the same function? I'm sure you probably look at a function like that and you think, what the heck am I supposed to do here? Do I need to use product rule or do I need to use quotient rule? Well, sometimes you actually have to use product rule and quotient rule together to find the derivative of certain functions. Obviously, that's going to be more complex functions usually, but it can be confusing and hard to figure out where to start with something like that. So I wanted to show you in this video an example of how to actually find the derivative of a function that requires you to use product rule and quotient rule together. And I actually did a few problems like this in one of my weekly live streams that I did recently. So this example actually comes directly from one of those live streams. I do have these live streams typically every Monday night at 5 o'clock Pacific time, so if you can join us next week, be sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon down below so you're notified when I'm going live next week, and hopefully we can see you there to get any questions you have answered. But anyway, let's go ahead and jump into the example and I'll show you what I'm talking about here. Find this derivative of y equals sine of x times x squared plus 2 all over the square root of x. So again, let's think about the order that we're doing this. I'm going to go through this one a little bit quicker than I did the last example because it's going to be a similar thought process. Think about if we were to plug some x value into this function. What order would we deal with things? The first thing we would do is deal with the sine of x and what we have in the parentheses here, x squared plus 2. We would deal with those two things first. Okay. Then the second thing we would deal with is the product. We would then multiply those two things together. So that'd be our second step. Then the final thing we would deal with, and actually I guess at the same time as the first step, we would kind of deal with this also. So basically these three things would be dealt with individually right off the bat. Then we would multiply those two things together, basically figuring out what the numerator of our fraction is. And then we would deal with this division. So that dividing would be the final third step that we would go through. So basically, since that dividing is the final step we would go through, whatever the final step you would go through when you're plugging some number in for x and figuring out order of operations, that's going to be the first thing we have to deal with when we're trying to take the derivative. So dividing is going to be the first thing that we have to deal with. We're going to want to start with quotient rule. So quotient rule says basically what we need to do is, like I said in the last example, we need to figure out what is the top of our fraction and what is the bottom of our fraction. So the top of our fraction is just everything on the numerator, and the bottom of our fraction is everything on the denominator. So that's, pretty straightforward. So like I said, if we're using quotient rule, the formula for quotient rule basically says if y is high over low, so the high part of the fraction over the low part of the fraction, the derivative of that is going to be low d high minus high d low all over low squared. So this version of this formula is actually one of the formulas on my study guide. I think this is much easier to remember how to apply when you're doing these on a test or on your homework. Really just doing them on your own. This formula I think is easier to remember. It kind of has a little bit of a jingly ring to it. Low d high minus high d low all over low squared. Sorry, that should be squared. So basically, we just need to figure out the high is going to be what we have on the numerator here. High, not ho. And then the bottom is going to be what we have on the numerator. The low is going to be, I'm sorry, not numerator. Getting my words all tangled up here. The low is going to be the low part of the fraction. Basically, just think of this as high and low. Low is the bottom, so low is going to be the square root of x. Then we also need to think about what is the derivative of the high, so d high, and d low, the derivative of the low. Well, if we're trying to find the derivative of this top here, now we're going to have to use product rule, because product rule says now we're doing the derivative of this thing times this thing. So that's going to create, again, like a separate sub problem for us to figure out. So let's go ahead and take that over here. If we're now trying to say we're going to find the derivative of sine of x times x squared plus 2, we're going to have to use product rule. So let's go ahead and call that f and that g. We're just going to call sine of x f, all the rest of this stuff g. Then we need to figure out f prime and g prime. So f prime is just the derivative of sine x, or the derivative of whatever we call f. Derivative of sine is cosine. The derivative of g prime, is just the derivative of x squared plus 2. Derivative of x squared can be found with the power rule. We would bring our 2 down in front, lower the power by 1. 2 minus 1 is 1. X to the 1 is just x. And then the derivative of a constant is 0. So it's just going to be that. Okay. So now, again, product rule says we're going to multiply these across, do f times g prime, f prime times g, and then add them up. Again, order doesn't matter. Just make sure you're multiplying the right things times each other. Derivative of one times the other non-derivative. Derivative of one times the other non-derivative. So we're going to get sine of x times 2x plus cosine of x times x squared plus 2. Okay, so this is going to be the derivative. Let's call this y1 again. y1 prime. This function right here is the derivative of this function right here. Well, this function right here is what was the top of our fraction in our quotient rule example. So if we go back over to our quotient rule problem now, if high is this thing, d high should just be the derivative of that thing, which is all this. So we're going to get all that right here. Okay, and then d low is just going to be the derivative of the low part of our fraction. Well, the derivative of the low part of our fraction is just the derivative of square root of x. Keep in mind, square root of x is the same as x to the 1/2 power, because taking the square root of something is exactly the same as raising it up to the 1/2 power. So to now take the derivative of x to the 1/2, all we have to do is power rule. We can bring our 1/2 down in front, bring our power down in front, keep our x as x, and then lower our power by 1. 1/2 minus 1 is the same as 1/2 minus 2/2, which is the same as negative 1/2. So our power is now going to be negative 1/2. Okay, so now we have these four pieces: high, low, d high, d low. And now we can just use this quotient rule formula. So let's go ahead and do that now. So that's just going to be low times d high. So low, x to the 1/2. So y prime is going to be x to the 1/2 times d high, which is all this right here. Make sure to put that all in parentheses because you want this this x to the 1/2 needs to distribute to both of these terms here. Okay, and then we're going to get minus high d low, so minus high minus all this times d low, so times 1/2 x to the negative 1/2, and then all over low squared, so all over the square root of x squared. The square root of x squared is just going to be x, because the square root and the squared will cancel out. So that's just going to be all over x. So from here, there definitely is going to be some simplifying that you could do. I'm going to go ahead and leave that to you. So I'm going to go ahead and leave our final answer right here. If you want to do some simplification, go right ahead. There should definitely be some simplifying you can do with this numerator here and this denominator, but I'll go ahead and leave that to you. Well, that wasn't too bad, right? Hopefully you found this video helpful. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button down below. It's a huge help to my channel so I can keep making more videos like this. And if you want to keep learning about derivatives, quotient rule, product rule, I have made tons of other videos on the topic. Just go ahead and click on one of those over there and let's keep on learning.